Hey Ken, how you doing there? This is Greg once again. It's January the 19th, year 2022. I'm going to tell you, first of all, I seriously doubt if there's going to be a video tomorrow. And the reason for that is I got kind of sidetracked during our class today, and we didn't get all of the next chapter read, chapter 8, and we'll have to finish that tomorrow in class. But I'm going to go ahead and present the lesson entirety to you today. Also, we're in remote learning here right now, and we're expecting some snow and some ice this evening, and we've already been told, teachers are already been told that we don't have to come in tomorrow. We can do our Google Meets from home, which is what I will be doing. So for those two reasons, today's lesson will be the last one until Friday. Who knows? I may change my mind. I may come up with something good in class tomorrow and decide I want to talk to you about that as well. I want to talk to you, though. I've had this on the board, I meant to, and you gave me an excellent answer for that. Why was Jim crying? And I actually had a student come up really, really close to that today. I had a couple other students who were on track anyway. They just didn't fulfill everything. They didn't take it to its logical conclusion, but they had some good points. I told the students yesterday they could look back in chapter 7 and get some clues for it, and I had one student who actually did in the right way. Now the rest of his answer was wrong, was completely wrong, but I commended him for finding the right places in the chapter that would point him in the right direction. One of the things I talked to the students about today, just to kind of refresh their memories as much as anything else, was kind of the theme from this first section of the book. The first 11 chapters is part 1 of this book, and really almost every chapter is saying the same thing, and it's what Atticus had told Scout. You never really understand a man, the rest of the quote, all right, until you climb into his skin, so on and so forth. And that's really kind of the mini lesson in every one of these chapters. How people are dealing with with their neighbors, and how they deal with people that are not the same social or economic level as they are. But one of the things that I pointed out was that that Scout and Dill in particular, and you can include, not Scout, Jim and Dill in particular, and you can include Scout in this as well, is in their dealings with Boo Radley. They're really not, up to this point anyway, they have really not been trying to understand him, to climb into his skin. Dill and Jim, they have simply wanted to see Boo Radley because he's like a part of the freak show at the carnival. And again, they wanted to see him and how weird and how strange he is, and they can get a nice little thrill out of just seeing him. On the ironic side, and I think the kids came to this conclusion today mainly because I made them, on the very ironic, they've come to the conclusion that it was Dill who sewed Jim's pants up and left them folded over the fence. Did I say Dill? It was Boo who did that. It was Boo who had been leaving them all the things in the knothole as well. And so the person who was an object of derision, who was considered just a strange person by those kids, and they didn't care to understand him, he is going to great lengths to show himself friendly to them and to kind of fulfill their fulfill their desires. He's able to understand them from their. He is, in a way, he's able to climb into their skin and understand what they're thinking. One of the students, the question that I asked, why was Jim crying? One of the students asked, and it's one of my smartest kids in class. For his answer, he said, he was probably upset, Jim was probably upset because there was no longer a special treat each day in the knot hole. And he looked forward to getting that special treat. And that's true. I mean, it's true at all stages of our lives. We all like little good surprises, things that show us that people care for us and they're concerned about us and stuff like that. That's a human trait. That's a human quality. And that was a good answer. I liked what he answered, but it wasn't, of course, the answer that I was looking for. So once again, and as you know at the end of this story, the irony going on, Jim and Dill just dying. They're obsessed with seeing Boo Radley get him to come out so they can see how strange he is and what kind of a strange person he is, and they can marvel at him. And he's the one that's really looking out for them, and he's showing his care and his concern for him. This story in this chapter, chapter 8. Of course, this is about Miss Maudie's house and the fire, and it goes on, and you think, what does this have to do with the rest of the book? Well, of course, by the end of the chapter, it becomes obvious why it's in here, just like the chapter with Mrs. Henry Lafayette DuBose in chapter 11 coming up. And it just seems like it's just thrown in there for no reason, but there's a logical reason why Harper Lee included this chapter in the book. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing throughout this first part of this book. Understanding your neighbor and understanding the person that you're dealing with, and showing yourself friendly to someone who's not necessarily shown himself friendly to you. And of course, there's plenty of biblical things, about that speak to that both in Proverbs and in the New Testament as well. But anyway, this chapter, of course, Miss Maudie's house burns, fire. Everybody comes out in the street. I remember when I was, 10, 11 years old, a neighbor's house, 2 houses down from me, caught on fire, burned down, or didn't burn completely down. It burned a lot of it down. It got remodeled, rebuilt. But the man who worked there, the man who lived there with his family, he had pulled his car in the garage at nighttime, parked it in the garage, left a burning cigarette in his car, caught the car on fire, caught the house on fire. And everybody on the street, there was 25 houses on my street, practically everybody from all the houses came down and stood around and watched this house burn. And that's kind of what this scene reminded me of in chapter 8, when Miss Maudie's house caught on fire and was burning down. Of course, we were told earlier, foreshadowing by Harper Lee, we were told earlier that Miss Maudie hated her house. And, as you've read the book farther, she gets a new house out of it, and not quite as large, but it suits her. Well, it was cold out there. The first part of this chapter talks about the first snow in Macomb since 1885. And Scout wakes up and she's terrified. She had never seen snow before, and she was afraid of it. And they got out of school that day, probably the only day in their whole lives they got out of school because of snow, because it rarely snows, at least in southern Alabama, any time of the year. While they're out there, they make the snowman, and I thought it was pretty ingenious. It sounded like something maybe Brains Benton would do. They didn't have enough snow to make a snowman. So what did Jim do? He got a bunch of dirt, he got a bunch of mud, and he made 3 balls, the size, to make a snowman, made them out of mud, made them large, and then he covered it with snow. And I thought that was pretty ingenious. Sounded like something, it wouldn't surprise me, something my brother and me would do, or something you would probably do when you were younger yourself. But anyway, and it was funny, of course, the snowman, they made it in the shape of Mr. Avery. I don't think I talked to you about this on our recording the other day, but my kids figured out what Mr. Avery was doing from his porch. He was peeing from his porch a couple chapters back. And most of the classes I teach, again, I usually teach lower level classes, and this is a higher level class. Most of my lower level classes, I have to tell them he was peeing from his porch. but not, this class figured it out. And, you know, that's something that's not in the movie. I can get the picture in my head. You know, I've got grandsons, and my wife, bless her heart, she didn't have any brothers. She didn't understand how boys were. And my sons, when they were growing up, if they had to go pee and the bathroom was occupied, they'd just go out in the backyard behind the house, find them a tree or a bush, which we always had back there, and they just pee. Drove my wife crazy. Just drove my wife crazy. Now I've got grandsons that do the same thing. I've got one of my daughters and her husband have 2 boys, and by the way, she's expecting another child next month. Be my 8th and last grandchild, more than likely. But they've always, if they need to go pee and they're outside at, you know, in the evening and got a fire going or whatever, and they need to go pee, my daughter and her husband just say, okay, just go over that bush over there and go pee. Still drives my wife crazy. And I've told my wife for years and years and years, you really needed a brother. She has 2 sisters. Said, you really needed a brother to figure out how boys think. But anyway, so Jim is building the snowman in the obvious shape of Mr. Avery. And of course, Atticus figures it out, as does Miss Maudie, or Miss Stephanie, whoever would say, I think it's Miss Maudie, had seen it. And they make him, you know, change the shape, and he tries to make it look like a woman, but it's you know, it's still obviously Mr. Avery. So then Miss Maudie's house burns down. I'm having to backtrack here because I got ahead of myself earlier. You know, her house burns down. Everybody's standing out there, just like when I was a kid, just watching this house burn down, and she loses, you know, her whole house, and they can't save it. You know, they're desperately trying to save the houses next to them, the Finch house and Miss Stephanie's house as well, which they do. But Jim and Scout were ordered by Atticus to go down and stand in front of the Radley house because it was a distance away from the danger. And they stood there. It was cold. It was the coldest night they could probably remember in their lifetimes. And it was... they were cold, they were shivering. Scout says she was cold, and Jim tried to throw his arm around her and keep her warm, but that didn't suffice. So after the fire trucks had left, the Finches, everybody went back to their own homes, and Atticus and Jim and Scout got to their home, and Atticus is going to make them hot chocolate, I think. But he's sitting there, and all of a sudden he stares at Scout, and he says, what is that? What is that? You know, what's that thing you have? Scout didn't have any idea what he's talking about. Basically says, you know, thing you got wrapped around you, the blanket. And she didn't even know she had a blanket wrapped around her. She and Jim both were so engrossed in watching the fire that somebody, which we know to be Boo, came out and wrapped her in a blanket to keep her warm. And Jim figured it out. And Atticus, you know, kind of smiled at it as well. And the Scout didn't have any clue. It took her a while after Jim had told her it was Boo, came out, you know, and freaked Scout out, you know, and you know, the whole point of this little episode here is how that Boo is looking out for them while they have other motives, other motives for getting in contact with him. He is showing genuine concern for them, regardless of whatever motivates him. You know, whether he's thinking like a child or he is thinking as an adult. I mean, he's been, you know, basically he's been in prison in his own house for more than 15 years. You know, who knows mentally what has happened to them? He may have regressed to, you know, to a small child thinking, which is what he could have done. That's maybe why he's thinking along their lines. But he is obviously looking out for them. He is obviously trying to place their needs and their concerns, such as the pants over the fence, plus the little tokens that are, you know, been left in the tree, you know, and now the blanket wrapped around Scout. And he is obviously doing what the kids should have been doing, but they're just kids, you know. You know, he's looking out for them, and he's made, you know, the deal with the knothole. The knothole and the gifts in the knothole of the tree. That was the only connection that Jim had left to make connections with Boo Radley. I don't think, after the trouble he got into last time, with trying to peek in the shutter and losing his pants and stuff like that, I don't think Jim was going to make another effort to go down there to the Radley house and try to get Boo to come out. And so the knothole was his final connection that he had with Boo Radley. And twice in that chapter, chapter 7, it talks about Jim was about ready to tell Scout something, but he stopped and he backed off. And I believe what he was about ready to tell her was that it was Boo who was putting that stuff in there. And that he'd figured out also that Boo had left him his pants and stuff like that. But he never did tell Scout that. And so when this final last connection that he had with Boo, he was leaving them presents when it was now taken away. I think that's what made Jim upset. I think that's why Jim was crying, which is basically what you told me as well when you sent me the message. So anyway, that's where we end today, and that's what I will finish with my class tomorrow. We didn't get into all that today. I didn't talk about hardly any of that today because we were after the first thing that we did. We were talking about why he was crying, because that was left over from yesterday. We just read about a third of the chapter today, so we'll read the rest of it tomorrow. If I come up with anything that I think is profitable or whatever, I'll make you a short video, but I'm not planning on it right now. So anyway, Ken, you have a good rest of the day. Hope you're better today than you were yesterday. Hope you're better tomorrow than you are today. Talk to you.